Future Warrior, The Mars Campaign. Chapter 5. 350 kilometers above the unfolding battle on the ground, in low Martian orbit, hands were at work to ensure that the fight would indeed last far longer than anyone had previously planned. Swift and silent, Atlas Heerden slipped from bed. A young man only in his mid-20s, Atlas possessed both youthful good looks and charm. Both, however, hid a calculating mind and a heart as cold as ice. He paused for a moment to check himself in the mirror. His eyes were the gray of angry thunderclouds, and his dark hair was wavy, giving the semblance of being both orderly and carefree at the same time. He admired his face, one he had used to charm countless women since his early teens. Yet none of them had ever held a place in his heart. They were tools to be used, manipulated to suit his purpose, and then discarded. He momentarily gazed upon the reflection of the bed behind him in mirror. A beautiful young woman stirred slightly. He examined her, as a layman might have examined a fine painting, scrutiny and recognition without real depth or connection. Atlas regarded her with cold detachment, feeling nothing for the woman he had seduced with a combination of smooth words, smiles, and hormonal manipulation spray only hours before. Atlas could not remember the last time he had cared about someone, or about something, other than completing his mission or meeting his objectives. Turning his attention from her, he adjusted his uniform, that of a UEF lieutenant commander. He had not earned the rank, but he thought the uniform's crispness suited him. The rank was perfect for his goals. It was high enough to gain unquestioned access to even the most sensitive areas on the ship, while being low enough to not attract undue attention in the unlikely event he encountered another senior officer. Atlas paused briefly alongside the bed, silently pressing a device to the smooth skin of the sleeping woman's neck. Satisfied, he left the room without looking back and headed confidently down the narrow passageway. He knew there was a small risk that the drug he had injected into the young woman would cause irreversible brain damage. However, it was more likely that it would leave her unable to recall the events of the past 48 hours. Either outcome would serve his purpose. Her well-being was of little importance. Just another meaningless life amongst the billions that made up humanity. He made his way down several levels to the lowest of the ship's communications network hubs. As he approached the hub, a petty officer looked up from a digital pad and the magazine he had been intently reading. The sudden appearance of a senior officer, so far from the more easily accessible hubs on the upper decks, took the man by surprise, and he jumped to his feet. Atlas strode up to the man, scowling. "Is this your idea of security?" The man began to reply, but Atlas cut him off. "Don't interrupt me while I'm talking. Don't you know we're at war? The captain expects all crew members to do their utmost in these demanding times. Show me your duty log." Atlas examined the list, feigning close scrutiny. "Have you noticed anything unusual, petty officer? Anything I should know about?" "No, sir," replied the man shakily. "Everything has been quiet. Is that how you like things? Quiet? Is that why you joined the Navy?" Atlas snapped. Before the man could reply, Atlas unclipped a security pass from one of his epaulets and swiped it before reattaching it deliberately backwards. The petty officer was too rattled to note the breach of procedure, with all passes meant to be visually inspected and swiped by the on-duty guard. On reflex, he did, however, glance at the pass, his training struggling to get through his uncomfortableness with the agitated officer who had interrupted his quiet shift. Atlas noticed the glance. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, petty officer. Update this. I have no time to waste." Atlas handed the man the coded data storage device he had earlier cloned from his female companion. As expected, the man complied, eager to rid himself of the troublesome officer. His caution also serving to shape his decision not to point out the officer's error in placing his security pass on backwards. "Let someone else tell the sour prick," the petty officer thought as he plugged in the data device and downloaded the cleared level of information into it from the military network, Milnet. With a beep, the data was security coded and transferred to the device, and it was handed back. Atlas pocketed the device impatiently and then took the written log the man was holding in readiness. Atlas was about to sign factious name when at a sudden whim, he changed his mind and signed something else instead, the single word carefully written in a style very different to his natural one. "Very good. Thank you, petty officer. That will be all," said Atlas dismissively as he handed the log back. As Atlas strode away, the young petty officer watched him go and breathed a sigh of relief. That would hopefully be the most eventful part of his shift. Now he could get back to examining the latest sports results in peace. While he walked, Atlas plugged the data device into a small handheld palm computer. As the information scrolled up, he smiled. Success was his. As he had predicted, the warrant officer he had seduced as part of her position in the ship's Combat Information Center, CIC, had a high level of clearance. He had in his hands the latest updates to the tactical battle plan, including fleet, troop, and supply movements. He smiled inwardly at his own genius. Everything was going to plan. It was all too easy. The troops destined to assault Tharsis would find their enemy well prepared. Atlas grinned to himself at the mischief the information would cause. He knew that for now the hunt would be on. It would not take long for the intelligence branch to realize that the Red Legion had been forewarned of the impending attack. They would then trace back where the information had been accessed and find a log entry. They would then be on his trail, but he wasn't worried. They were good, but was better. Once the base was declared secure, and after being given a rousing send-off in the air cav, the Terra Nova men were picked up by an LTT and taken back to FOB Vulcan. Once they arrived at Vulcan, it was snatch some rest, rearm, and prepare to go back into the field. The Terra Nova did not sit on the sidelines while others fought in their place. "There's plenty of time to rest when you're dead," the commander of the Terra Nova was once famously quoted as saying to an exhausted applicant during selection trials. That recruit had gone on ace the trials and to become one of the most respected unit commanders in the entire Terra Nova. Stalker looked across at the man, known to his mates as D. Epsilon 2-1 was now back to its 9 remaining members. The 2 scout snipers who had accompanied them since planetfall had now returned to their original mission of recon. Stalker was sad to see them go. Both were good men, and the unit was significantly weakened without them. Elysium had by this time all but been secured, and the full weight of the UEDF now began to be turned on its next objective, Tharsis, with its vital industrial center, an immense terraforming facility. Stalker knew from D that the Terra Nova was slated to play a part in the attack on Tharsis. The division, however, would not be involved in the initial phase of the operation. The break would give the Terra Nova time to reorganize its scattered units and take stock of losses taken during the Elysium landings. For the men of Epsilon 2-1, the next few days were spent reorganizing and in constant movement as the division was redeployed to the Tharsis theater. No small logistical task. The UEDF's logistics system, however, was a well-oiled machine, and in near record time, Stalker found himself at the Terra Nova's new base of operations, a newly established FOB, designated Phoenix. Offensive operations in Tharsis had commenced as soon as heavy UEA divisions could be landed, and initial reports had started to filter through to FOB Phoenix. It was quickly becoming clear that Tharsis would not prove to be the same as Elysium, with the Red Legion committing significant forces to hold the region. Tharsis proper was located on an immense plateau which rose with a gradual slope before running up against a high mountain range which formed a horseshoe shape flanking the plateau. Scouting elements, both ground and air, had met with fierce resistance from well-entrenched infantry, together with light armor of very heavy anti-air defenses. Orbital intel estimated enemy strength to be at least 2 core plus support elements. That meant that there was somewhere between 150 to 200,000 well-entrenched Red Legion infantry holding the plateau's only open slope. Orbital bombardment had been ruled out due to heavy ground laser fire, which had damaged several warships, and TACCOM didn't want to risk destroying the valuable industrial facilities. Air units tasked with seeking out and destroying the lasers had taken murderous losses due to well-prepared air defenses. The Red Legion had wanted a ground assault, and the UEDF had given them one. 3 UEA Corps, the 6th Infantry, 9th Infantry, and the 10th Mechanized had been deployed to the surface and had smashed into the Red Legion defenses and were now grinding their way up the slope. Losses on both sides had been heavy, and the UEDF attack had gone wrong from the beginning, with the supporting artillery due to launch a massive preemptive strike on the Reds' positions themselves coming under counter-battery fire. What had resulted was a massive artillery duel that was still continuing. With air options limited, this effectively removed much of the support fire for the advancing troops and forced them to take on an entrenched enemy without the usual support options. Not an ideal situation for the attacking UA Corps. This combined with another factor to make the attack a difficult and bloody one. Due to the mountainous terrain flanking the plateau, the UEDF was unable to deploy its vastly superior forces as there simply wasn't the room to deploy them without creating serious overcrowding, a dangerous thing on the battlefield. This was the situation now outlined to the 21st Company of the 2nd Regiment Terra Nova in the briefing room. The Terra Nova would be deployed in full strength to relieve an infantry division that had fighting through trenches and plascrete emplacements for 48 hours and was in desperate need of a rest. You've all read the reports. It's a bloody mess. The infantry are fighting hard and have weakened the enemy's gates. Now it's time for the Terra Nova to break it down. There was no cheering, no applause, just the quiet contemplation of combat veterans knowing that a hard fight was imminent. We will be uniting with our vehicles for this mission, so at least we won't have to walk. That brought a chuckle from the men. Okay, we have 2 hours before we deploy to the front, so study your TAC maps and check your gear. There are more than snipers and civilians where we're going. These Reds are well equipped, and they mean to fight. So let's show them how it's done. Death to all gentlemen. Stalker watched as Big D consulted with an infantry officer who had sat in on the briefing. The officer looked tired. Before leaving the briefing room, Stalker walked over to one of the holo imagers and plugged it into a socket his suit's arm and downloaded the holographic maps and reports that had been displayed during the briefing, so he could study them later on either his helmet's HUD or his EEA's arm-mounted projector. This allowed every soldier who had attended the briefing to keep a copy of the intel displayed for quick reference. There was only minimal risk of the enemy capturing the information as it was protected by advanced encryptions from any outside hacking, and the suit also monitored the vital signs of the wearer, and in the event of death, all information stored was automatically erased. As he walked out under the bright lights of FOB Phoenix, Stalker could hear the roar from the engines of hundreds of LTDs lined up on the base's landing pads, and everywhere he looked black armored figures and lines moved towards them. The whole division was being moved up closer to the front, where they would link up with their armored transports, which had been moved into position some hours before. The 21st Company of the Terra Nova was going to war alongside the other Terra Nova infantry companies that formed the Terra Nova Division's main fighting force. The Terra Nova, like all of the assault divisions, had a total strength of 20,000 elite soldiers organized into 10 regiments, each 2,000 strong. In turn, these regiments were divided into 10 companies of 200, which were in turn divided into 16 12-man units, along with an 8-man company command unit, or CCU. The 1st through 6th regiments were elite EEA-equipped assault infantry. The 7th Regiment was equipped with the division's artillery and heavy weapons. The 8th Regiment specialized in reconnaissance and included the division's scout sniper teams and striders. The 9th Regiment consisted of the division's mechanized transport companies, while the 10th Regiment contained the division's combat logistics and armory units. The 2nd Terra Nova had suffered 112 casualties, including 21 killed, during the Elysium operation from its total strength of 2,000. A small total, but a higher number than any of the other Terra Nova regiments engaged in the operation, mainly due to being inserted close to the center of Elysium Prime, where the concentration of automated defenses and booby traps had been heaviest. It was these troops, the already blooded men of his own regiment, that Stalker could see boarding the LTTs. Stalker moved to his designated LTT, joining Big D and the others already on board. A few minutes later, the regiment received the go code, and all over the base hundreds of LTTs lifted off into the darkness. The LTTs flew low and fast, the pilots holding formation in the pitch black. From his seat, Stalker could see the other flights of LTTs around his with his helmet's enhanced night vision, the aircraft bobbing up and down as they closely followed the terrain, showing the skill of the pilots. After a time, Stalker began to hear chatter on TACnet. They were getting close to the front. Several minutes later, the lead flight of LTTs rose over a low ridge, revealing a distant horizon that was lit up with tracer fire and explosions. A battle of huge proportions was taking place, and it looked to Stalker like every weapon possessed by both sides was being fired en masse. Tracer fire of all colors, bright streaks of fire marking the paths of missiles, the intense flashes of plasma and railgun fire, and the eerie blue glow of flame throwers lit up the horizon. There was little time to think as Stalker and the others watched the display, everyone marveling at the level of firepower that was being unleashed. The LTTs dropped immediately and swept left parallel to the axis of the front before coming to a halt in their designated assembly areas. As soon as the LTTs touched down, the troops poured out, Stalker with them. As they hit the ground, shouted orders from assembly area controllers began to direct the individual units towards their designated vehicles. As Stalker headed for the two vehicles assigned to his unit, he saw that signs of battle were everywhere. The debris of war littered the ground, and acrid smoke filled the air. A 9th Regiment officer manning the assembly area ushered the men along to the waiting vehicles, his booming voice carrying over the din of idling engines. "Common boys get mounted. We can't stay here long. We have already been shelled twice. Those red bastards know we're here. Let's go, move it." Stalker and the others broke into a jog and quickly reached their vehicles, a pair of Ironhide IFVs. As Stalker scrambled into the passenger compartment of his vehicle, he heard the whine of artillery shells over the sound of the engine, and the comm net crackled with calls of incoming. They had arrived at the combat zone. With a lurch and an explosion of revs, the IFV began moving. All around, the thud of artillery impacts echoed inside the passenger compartment. Indeed, the noise would have been deafening if not for the EEA helmet sonic protection system that instantly drowned out excessive noise, just as the light-sensitive visor screened out flashes of bright light to keep them from temporarily blinding the wearer. The sonic system was a brilliant innovation, as while drowning out loud noise, it still allowed through small sounds, like the shrapnel impacts on IFV's armored hull and the reports coming in over the commnet. These small sounds could prove life-saving on a battlefield. Stalker reached up and grabbed the overhanging secure net cable above his seat for the external monitoring system and plugged it into a socket on his arm. A rotating camera, located on the outside of the IFV fitted with night vision, was another part of the new situational awareness doctrine adopted by the UDF. The doctrine was designed to give the individual soldier as much information about the environment around them as possible. In this situation, the remote camera system allowed the transported men to get an idea of the terrain and events going on outside of the IFV. In this way, they would know what they were getting into when they dismounted to fight on foot. As his HUD display flicked to the camera view, Stalker saw a green-hued vision of lots of armored vehicles advancing parallel to his own. The formation was being straddled by artillery fire, but most of it was now thankfully behind them. As the view continued its 360-degree rotation, Stalker saw that some had not been so lucky. The burning wrecked hull of an IFV being lit by secondary explosions to the rear. The terrain was a gradual incline, and it had been heavily fortified. Several destroyed plascrete emplacements were visible, along with trenches and other earthworks cut into the rocky red earth. While here, and there were burnt-out vehicles bearing the glyph symbols of the Red Legion. Stalker also saw, although hard to spot as the vision from the camera rocked with the motion of the vehicle, the scattered bodies of fallen enemy soldiers. After what seemed like an eternity, the line of IFVs lurched to a stop. "We will be holding here while the 167th Infantry withdraws through our lines," came the message from the vehicle commander. A few minutes passed when the commander suddenly spoke again. "Friendlies in sight to front." As the camera's view rotated through the frontal arc, Stalker could see vehicles pouring down the slope towards them. Mixed with them were infantry on foot. All looked battle-scarred, some of the infantry bearing signs of injury, with many being helped by comrades. The procession of withdrawing units took several minutes to pass as the 167th disengaged from their forward positions just up the slope and made way for the Terra Nova to advance. Towards the end, a dirty-looking infantry officer jumped up onto the IFV and spoke to the vehicle commander. Shortly after the vehicle commander spoke over the commnet, "Okay, we're moving up now. Enemy positions are believed to be less than 2 clicks ahead. We will advance 500 meters, then deploy. Good luck, boys." As they moved forward again, Stalker saw a thick screen of multispectral smoke ahead that had been deployed by the withdrawing infantry to block enemy targeting and vision systems, the screen marking the limit of their advance. The Terra Nova IFVs halted just short of the smoke screen, and the back doors were lowered, red dust swirling inside as the soldiers poured out and deployed in tactical formation. To his left and right, Stalker could see other vehicles unloading their deadly cargo of black armored warriors. As soon as they had delivered their cargo, the IFVs began to crawl forward, their multi-turrets tracking from side to side, seeking the enemy. Stalker fell in with the others of his section behind their iron hide, guns up and watching the angles to both sides of the vehicle for any sign of the Red Legion defenders. They moved forward into the haze, which severely limited the vision on both sides, as even with their advanced night vision, the Terra Nova troops and vehicles couldn't see more than a few yards. Big D ordered the unit to go to Vox, the voice-activated mode of the EEA's helmet comm system, meaning that the unit's members could talk to each other by voice command without the need to manually activate the commnet. Stalker had just switched to Vox mode when, without warning, bright flashes appeared in the smoke and round began to ricochet of the iron hide in front of Stalker, the IFV's turrets swinging towards the source of the incoming fire. The iron hide's multi-turret switched to autocannon with an audible clunk, and with a deep buzz a line of tracers lit up the night and snaked off into the smoke, the bright tracer rounds able to be seen scattering in the darkness as they impacted. "Deploy right," came D's instant reaction, and they moved to the right of the IFVs, seeking the enemy. They moved up to a shattered bunker, wrecked blocks of plascrete littering the ground. D held his rifle around the jagged edge of the bunker. Using its camera, enemy trench 20 meters set 3-second delay. D pointed to Stalker and 2 others. Stalker grabbed a frag grenade and turned the dial on it until the digital display read 03. D hand signaled now. As one, they rose over the chunks of wrecked bunker, activating and throwing their grenades smoothly as they did. The grenades landed in or on the lip of the trench, and before any of the red uniformed enemy knew what was happening, they exploded, sending a wave of deadly shrapnel slicing in every direction. Hard on the heels of the explosions came a 9 charging black armored men of Epsilon 2-1. Stalker jumped into the trench, landing on the soft corpse of a dead enemy, and immediately looked for targets. Several wounded Reds were lying dazed in the bottom of the trench, and he cut them down ruthlessly with well-aimed shots. In the corner of his EEA helmet's display, a small circle like radar showed 8 red dots close to Stalker's location. These were the other members of his unit, and he saw that they were spreading out down the trench in both directions. The suit function allowing units to remain coordinated and aware of their team mates even when in low visibility conditions or dense terrain. To his left, an iron hide rolled over the trench, its turret now spewing flame at a second trench further up the slope. "Keep the pressure up," came Big D's shouted order. All around them, firing had broken out, tracers whipped, grenades detonated. The men of the Terra Nova were in their element. Stalker peered over the trench, and looking to his front saw an enemy heavy machine gun crew get enveloped by a wave of blue chemical flame from one of the Terra Nova iron hides. Nearby red figures were popping up from the next trench and firing at the vehicles. Stalker sighted in on them and picked one off, sending the Red's helmet flying with a clean headshot. The others quickly ducked below the height of the trench. A moment later, a grenade arced skyward, heading towards Stalker's position. Stalker dived left, and the grenade went off with a crump, sending chunks of red earth everywhere. Stalker shook his head to clear it, and heard firing to his right, followed by several grenade bursts in quick succession. Clear forward. Stalker looked up to see D and the others sprinting across the gap and jumping into the next trench. As they moved, their rifles were up to their shoulders and firing. Clambering up out of his trench and keeping low, Stalker followed the others. the distant skyline lit by the flashes of artillery strikes from both sides. As he reached the second trench line, Stalker picked out the shape of a bunker through the thickening smoke haze. It was angled to the left and was firing across the line of the advancing Terra Nova forces. D had seen it too, and with a flurry of orders he changed direction, the rest of the unit hot on his heels. Small arms fire began to impact on the unit's armor, but they kept going, returning firing on the move. A sudden grenade burst, knocked Stalker off his feet. Rolling with the impact, he scrambled up and kept moving with a single-minded determination. There was no time to check for wounds. The pressure on the Red Legion fortifications had to be kept up. D reached the bunker first, and in one fluid movement, unclipped a grenade from a waist clip, armed it, and threw it expertly through one of the firing slits. There was a muffled crump and an explosion of dust from the slit, followed by cries of wounded men. A burst of fire coming from the access trench to the rear of the bunker struck D's leg, and he spun and fell. Stalker saw movement and on reflex brought his rifle up, cutting down two red armored figures who were starting to climb out of the access trench. With the others covering D, Stalker dropped down into the trench and stormed into the bunker, finishing off the wounded occupants. Slinging his rifle, Stalker picked up the bunker's heavy machine gun and redeployed it a sandbag angling up the slope and down the length of the bunker's access trench. Moments later, a number of red figures came hustling down the trench at a jog, one of them carrying the long tube of a missile launcher. Stalker opened fire, and combined with the fire of the rest of the unit, the line of Reds was mowed down, falling in a bloody heap in the bottom of the trench. Stalker moved forward, covered by suppressing fire from the others, and picked up the missile launcher, a Cobra anti-armor weapon. Targeting another bunker further up the slope, while ignoring the whirlwind of fire passing all around him, Stalker fired, the missile streak home, scoring a direct hit, sending plascrete shards scything in every direction. Stalker dropped the now useless launcher and slid back into the trench. A quick glance at his suit status display showed he had taken several hits, but all had been stopped by the tough ceramic composite armor. Stalker moved back down to his trench, to where D was getting medical attention, a coagulant powder to stop the bleeding, but it was only a flesh wound, and Stalker knew it wouldn't slow Big D down. Stalker did a quick assessment of the battlefield. All along the line, the Terra Nova was advancing rapidly, his own unit having taken 2 lines of trenches and destroyed as many bunkers in a matter of minutes, and the assault seemed to be proceeding as planned. Stalker suddenly saw movement in the smoke haze further up the slope and switched his EEA helmet's mode to infrared to see if he could get a clearer picture of what it was. Blending in and out of the smoke was a mass of charging infantry. As they came on, Stalker switched back to automatic, the helmet flicking to night vision. The Reds, it seemed, were counterattacking. Enemy fire was sprayed in every direction as a seemingly endless torrent of red-colored infantry came charging down the slope straight at them. Stalker threw up his rifle in unison with the others. Even D, still lying down with his injured leg, brought up his rifle, and in short controlled bursts they opened fire. All along the line, the rate and noise of fire from the Terra Nova doubled in an instant. A veritable tempest of fire was being accurately dealt out, and Red Legion troops began to fall in numbers. But still they kept coming. The deep buzz of an IFV's autocannon to Stalker's left joined the fray. A missile streaked across Stalker's field of view and went off with a ground-shaking explosion, sending red earth high into the sky, having narrowly missed the Ironhide whose turret swung to seek out this new threat. Stalker saw at first the low profile of a Wasp anti-tank vehicle, a tracked missile-armed tank hunter. It was coming down the slope, its crew desperately switching to manual fire mode due to interference with their corkscrew anti-armor missiles guidance systems from the smoke billowing across the battlefield. The Ironhide's multi-turret clicked as it changed weapon, and long red lance like beams of pulse rifle fire streaked across the battlefield at a rate of 1 round every second. The rounds began striking the Wasp, making it swerve to one side in a shower of sparks and grind to a halt, smoke pouring from its forward hatch. While this was going on, the masses of red infantry continued their counterattack. Some were running down the slope, while others behind them dropped to one knee to provide cover fire. More red uniformed infantry appeared amongst the rubble of destroyed bunkers, fleeting targets popping up to fire a burst, then disappearing from sight. As Stalker called "loading" and rammed home a fresh magazine into his rifle, he could see it wasn't going to be enough. There were simply too many of them. For every one they dropped, two took his place, and although they only wore basic infantry standard battle armor, SBA, not the advanced EEA used by dedicated assault forces like the Terra Nova, the Reds' body armor was saving many of the hits that were being scored on them, and they were getting back up to keep fighting. As the charging Reds closed the distance, Stalker worked the pump-action underslung M503 50mm grenade launcher on his rifle, and with practice skill lobbed a grenade over some rubble, the resulting explosion sending several Red figures sprawling. Working his rifle from left to right, Stalker expended the remaining 4 grenades in the launcher's magazine, and then reached for his only spare. Slamming it home with a metallic snap, Stalker brought the rifle up again, emptying the contents of his impulse magazine into the advancing mass of the enemy. Loading! Everything appeared in flashes of green to Stalker, but to the naked eye the sight was spectacular, the slope being lit by a veritable hailstorm of blue laced 12mm impulse rifle fireback dropped with a bluish-purple glow of flamethrowers. Mixed in were the flashes of grenades and artillery strikes, streams of ricocheting autocannon tracers, the bright streaks of missiles, red lances of pulse rifle fire, and countless sparking bursts from the Red Legion infantry's rifles. Someone more poetic might have called it a beautiful orchestra of death. Stalker expended the new magazine on his grenade launcher in a few furious seconds. There was no shortage of targets, then switched back to shooting from his rifle in controlled bursts. The 12mm explosive tipped ammunition fired by his impulse rifle, separating limbs from bodies and cracking open body armor. The impulse rifle had been developed especially for the assault divisions, but was also in limited use with other special purpose units within the UEDF. Despite its fearsome firepower, lethality, and rugged construction, it had proven too expensive to be issued to all UEA units, meaning that only relatively small numbers were fielded by the UEDF. Its unique 12mm caseless explosive tipped ammunition and impulse firing system, a much simplified version of railgun technology, which also gave the rounds their blue tracer-like characteristics, was exceptionally costly to manufacture, and as always, a soldier's life had a price tag attached. The furious firing continued right up until the red line merged with the much thinner black. Then all hell broke loose. As the lines came together, Stalker emptied his last half-dozen rounds into a charging Red, nearly cutting him in half, then brought his rifle up into the face of another, knocking his dust mask off and breaking the man's nose, sending him reeling to the ground. As the Red fell at his feet, Stalker brought down his armored boot with vicious force, crushing his skull. Dropping his now empty rifle, Stalker, using both hands, drew a ceramic-bladed combat knife from sheath on one of his thighs and a compact Z88 silenced semi-automatic pistol from a holster on the other. As he did, sensors in his hands detected the presence of the drawn close combat weapons. A red light beeped in his HUD, and with a shrill rasp, 3 razor-sharp inch and a half-long ceramic spikes extended from just above each of his armored fists. Stalker fell into a combat stance, and using his pistol shoot yet another charging Red in the face, shattering his helmet, before in one movement bringing his other hand up and across, effectively slashing the Red's throat with the knife he was holding extended lengthways in his hand. At the same time, Stalker shifted his weight as the next man ran at him and threw an uppercut punch, the hand-mounted ceramic spikes biting deep, the Red lifted clean off the ground by the force of the punch. Another Red swung his rifle down towards him. Stalker twisted and caught the downward stroke on his ceramic composite shoulder plate. Before using all this strength, Stalker shouldered his attacker bodily back, before shooting him 3 times in the chest with his pistol. A Red wielding a wicked-looking long-bladed knife appeared from nowhere and slashed Stalker across his side. There was a loud rasping sound as the blade skittered over the armored plates, not penetrating to reach flesh. Stalker swung his pistol around and down, pistol whipping the helmetless enemy across his face, sending him sprawling, before expending the last 4 rounds in his pistol to finish the job. Stalker now had a moment's break to take in the view around him as he reloaded his pistol. It was full of struggling figures, an ironhide, unable to use its flamethrower for fear of hitting friendlies charged forward and through the mass of red infantry, crushing scores of them. Stalker saw a red nearby who was frantically reloading his IW-30, Infantry Assault Weapon Type 30, the standard-issue rifle of the UEDF, and charged him. The red saw him coming and desperately tried to bring his rifle to bear. He brought it up and started to fire just as Stalker crash-tackled him. Several rounds hammered into Stalker, but once again he was saved by his EEA's thick skin. Pulling his combat knife free of the red's chest, Stalker looked around, then holstered his knife and pistol before picking up the red's IW-30. Several of the unit's men were down, while D and a few others still struggled with the dwindling numbers of reds. With practiced precision, Stalker flicked the rifle selector switch to semi-automatic fire and picked off the remaining reds that were still resisting. D limped over to a writhing red and finished him off with his pistol. Sound off. Stalker responded first, Bravo Epsilon 2-1 clear, all clear. This was followed by the calls of the others still standing and continued until D said, Alpha Epsilon 2-1 clear, all clear. Of the 9 men of Epsilon 2-1 who had met the red counterattack, 1 was dead, 1 was unconscious, and 2 were severely wounded. Of the other 5, including Stalker, none had escaped unscathed and all would bear scars from the experience. Stalker caught his breath before speaking the preset voice recognition command, retract, his ceramic spikes retracting with a snap. I'm going to be sore in the morning. The closest ironhide was smoking and had shut down its damaged engine, while the other was half in a trench and burning furiously. The smoke was finally starting to clear and more of the battlefield was becoming visible. Red bodies lay everywhere, 2 and 3 deep in many places, small detachments of battered-looking black-clad troops. Many behind makeshift cover were cautiously emerging, while further up the slope the wrecked Wasp tank hunter was being rocked by secondary explosions. Looks like we got here just in time, Stalker said to D. Yeah, if the worn-out 167th Infantry had been here, they would have almost certainly been overrun. Stalker nodded sagely. We held them. Yeah, just they were expecting to find a worn-out infantry division, not the Terra Nova. That attack cost them dear. Them and us, D. D just nodded. Stalker knew he would mourn his comrades later in his own way. They all would, but the day's work wasn't yet done.